All right, so today we're going to be tackling caregiving. It looks like from all the stuff you sent us, you are interested in like practical advice, but also, some of the funny stuff that happens. Um, so we're going to try to give you a little bit of both today, whether you're new to caregiving or you've been doing this for a while and you're just looking for some new ideas, or maybe you're just curious about what caregiving is all about. This is going to be the deep dive for you. And lucky for us, we've got an expert here with us today who has really seen it all. So they're going to give us their take on everything from how to prepare for emergencies to, well, honestly, how to laugh when you feel like you're about to cry.
Well, I think one of the things that I've always found so interesting about caregiving is that it's kind of like an improv show.
Yeah.
Like you can have a plan, you can have a to-do list a mile long, but the reality is that things happen. You have to just be ready to adapt to whatever comes your way.
That is so true. I mean, that Medium article that talked about that, it was so relatable. I mean, who hasn't like planned out a doctor's appointment really carefully and then ended up like chasing their parent or loved one down the driveway because they decided they didn't want to go?
Oh, absolutely. Those are the moments where you really realize
Yeah.
that you just have to be flexible. You can't have these rigid expectations.
Yeah. I can imagine there are days when that's easier said than done, though.
Oh, absolutely. But
Yeah.
that's where I think finding a way to laugh about things can be so helpful.
Yeah.
It's not about like ignoring the seriousness of the situation or anything, but just finding those little moments of humor can really help you get through the day and keep your perspective.
Yeah. That makes me think about that book, Too Late to Panic.
Hmm.
Girl. It seems like Tina Ginn, the author, she's really mastered that whole like laughing through the chaos thing.
She really has it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so many caregivers, they just benefit from having that kind of resource because it's not just about the practical advice. You know, it's about feeling like someone out there gets it. Like she's saying, hey, I've been there. I know what it's like, and you're not alone in this.
Yeah, and she really like embraces those caregiving fails too. You know those moments where you just want to crawl under a rock. But I think it's so refreshing to see those moments acknowledged because, let's be real, sometimes those fails are just so absurd that they're actually funny.
They really can be.
Mm.
And, I think sharing those stories, whether it's with another caregiver or a friend,
Yeah.
or even just reading about them in a book like Tina's, it can be really cathartic because it makes you realize that you're not the only one who's gone through that.
So in Too Late to Panic, Tina talks about a lot of different topics, like getting prepared for emergencies, making sure you have all the essential supplies, building your confidence as a caregiver, and even making time for self-care without feeling guilty about it. It's like a whole guide to caregiving.
It really is. And,
Yeah.
and I think those practical aspects are so important.
Hmm.
A lot of times caregivers are so focused on taking care of their loved one that they forget to take care of themselves.
That makes sense. It's easy to get so caught up in the day-to-day DIAMS demands that you kind of lose sight of your own needs.
Exactly. And that's where self-care comes in. It's
Yeah.
not selfish. It's essential. You're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else.
So how do you help caregivers find that balance between caring for others and caring for themselves?
Well, one of the most important things is setting boundaries.
Mm.
That can mean setting limits on how much time you're spending caregiving or delegating tasks to other people or just carving out some time for yourself each day to do something that you enjoy.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of delegating tasks, I remember Tina had some really good advice in her book about creating a caregiving team and utilizing resources.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And those resources can be so varied depending on your situation and what your needs are. It could be family members, friends, support groups, professional services. There's a whole network out there.
So we've talked about the importance of being flexible, finding ways to laugh, and taking care of yourself. What are some other key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember, especially if they're just starting out on this caregiving journey?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that you are not alone in this. There is a whole community of caregivers out there who understand what you're going through, and there are resources available to support you.
That's so true. And even if you don't have like a big support network, there are online forums, support groups, places where you can connect with other caregivers, share experiences, both good and bad.
Absolutely. And I'd also encourage your listeners to embrace the learning process. Caregiving often throws you into situations you never expected, and it's okay to feel like you're learning as you go.
Yeah. It's about being open to new information, trying different approaches, and finding what works best for you and your loved one.
Exactly. And sometimes it's also about accepting that. You're not going to have all the answers, and that's okay. It's about being willing to ask for help, to admit when you're struggling, and to allow yourself to be vulnerable.
That vulnerability can be tough, but It's so important for connecting with others and building those supportive relationships that are so crucial in caregiving.
It really is. And it also allows you to be more compassionate with yourself. Caregiving is hard work, and it's okay to acknowledge that, to give yourself permission to make mistakes, to feel frustrated, and to ask for help when you need it.
So to recap, we've got flexibility, humor, self-care, community, and embracing the learning process. Those are some pretty solid foundations for anyone who's navigating the world of caregiving.
We really are. And,
Okay.
one thing that I think often gets overlooked is the importance of communication.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. And it's not just about communicating with your loved one. It's also about communicating with other caregivers, family members, medical professionals.
Exactly. It's about being clear about your needs, your limitations, your expectations. It's about actively listening to others and being willing to compromise.
And sometimes it's about having those difficult conversations that we tend to avoid.
That's right. Whether it's talking about end-of-life care or making decisions about living arrangements or even just addressing a challenging behavior, those conversations can be really difficult, but they're also really important.
And having those conversations early on can prevent a lot of stress and heartache down the road.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive and addressing issues head on, rather than letting them fester and potentially escalate.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from practical tips to emotional strategies. It's amazing how much there is to consider when you step into the role of a caregiver.
It really is. It's a multifaceted role,
Uh,
and it's one that requires a lot of heart, a lot of resilience, and a willingness to learn and grow.
and a good sense of humor doesn't hurt either, right?
Definitely not. Finding those moments of laughter, even amidst the challenges, can make all the difference.
And speaking of finding those moments of laughter, I remember that Medium article you mentioned earlier. They had a really interesting point about the unexpected ways that humor can show up in caregiving.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes it's like the most absurd situations that make you just want to laugh and cry at the same time.
Like that time you were talking about chasing your loved one down the driveway.
Exactly. It's those moments that remind you that caregiving is anything but predictable.
And those unpredictable moments are often the ones that lead to the best stories, right?
And they really are. And sometimes sharing those stories with others, even if it's just like little anecdotes about the everyday chaos of caregiving, you can create a sense of connection and understanding. That's so valuable.
Yeah, that reminds me of how Tina in Too Late to Panic, oh, she encourages readers to share their own funny or ridiculous caregiving stories. It's like she's creating a space for caregivers to connect, to laugh, and to realize that they're not alone in this crazy journey.
And that sense of community is so important. Knowing that other people are out there, experiencing similar joys and struggles, it can make all the difference. It's like having a tribe of people who get it, who can offer support advice, and maybe even a good laugh when you need it most.
So we've talked about the importance of flexibility, humor, self-care, community embracing the learning process. But there's another aspect of caregiving that we haven't touched on yet, and it's one that can be really challenging, navigating difficult conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Those conversations are often the ones we dread the most, but they're also the ones that can have the biggest impact on our caregiving journey.
So how do you approach those conversations in a way that's both sensitive and effective?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing that these conversations are rarely easy for anyone involved. It's okay to feel nervous, uncomfortable, or even scared.
And it's important to remember that these conversations, they're a process, not a one-time event. It might take multiple conversations over time to reach a decision or to work through a particular issue.
That's a great point. And it's also important to be mindful of the timing and the setting. Choosing a time and place where everyone feels comfortable and can speak freely can make a big difference.
And sometimes it's helpful to have a neutral third party present, whether it's a therapist, a social worker, or even a trusted friend or family member.
Absolutely. Having someone there to facilitate the conversation and to help keep things on track can be incredibly valuable.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from practical tips to emotional strategies, and even navigating difficult conversations. It's clear that caregiving is a complex and multifaceted journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's a journey that can be filled with both challenges and rewards.
And speaking of those rewards, I think it's important to acknowledge that caregiving can also be an incredibly meaningful and fulfilling experience.
Absolutely. It's an opportunity to give back to someone you love, to deepen your relationship with them, and to learn and grow in ways you never imagined.
And sometimes it's about those simple moments of connection, those shared smiles, those quiet moments of understanding that make all the challenges worthwhile.
Exactly. It's about finding those glimmers of light in the midst of darkness. Those moments of joy that remind you why you're doing this and why it matters.
And those moments of joy can often come from the most unexpected places, right? Like finding humor in the midst of chaos or discovering a new way to connect with your loved one.
Absolutely. It's about being open to those moments, about allowing yourself to be surprised and delighted by the unexpected.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into caregiving, I'd like to leave our listeners with a few key takeaways.
Sounds good. Let's recap what we've learned so far. So first and foremost, remember that you're not alone in this, that there's a whole community of caregivers out there who understand what you're going through, the ups, the downs, the joys, the frustrations, and they're ready to offer support, share their experiences.
Yeah, and as we saw from those resources you sent, there are so many different ways to connect with other caregivers, online forums, support groups, or even just reaching out to friends and family who've been there.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of just sharing your stories sometimes, just voicing those experiences.
Yeah.
Even the ones that make you want to laugh and cry at the same time can make a world of difference.
It's like that saying, shared joy is double joy, shared sorrow is half sorrow.
Yeah.
There's something really validating about knowing that you're not the only one who's dealt with, a runaway parent on the way to a doctor's appointment.
Exactly. And that leads to the second takeaway. Find the humor wherever you can, as we discussed. Humor isn't about making light of the situation, but it's about finding those moments of levity that help you cope with the stress and maintain your perspective.
Yeah, like finding those little pockets of sanity in the midst of the chaos. I loved how Too Late to Panic framed it, embracing the absurdity of it all.
Exactly. And it's not just about coping. Humor can also be a really powerful tool for connecting with your loved one, even in the midst of challenging situations.
That reminds me of a story Tina shared in the book about using humor to diffuse a tense moment during bath time with her loved one. Instead of getting frustrated, she found a way to make them laugh, and it totally changed the whole dynamic.
That's such a great example of how humor can be used to de-escalate a situation and create a more positive experience for everyone involved.
Okay, so we've got community, we've got humor. What else should our listeners keep in mind?
Self-care.
Uh-huh.
Self-care. Self-care. It's so easy to put your own needs on the back burner when you're in caregiver mode, but it's so crucial to prioritize your well-being, both physically and emotionally.
It's like what Tina was saying in Too Late to Panic about those self-care strategies that don't require a spa day or a week-long vacation, just finding those little pockets of time for yourself, even if it's just 15 minutes to read a book or take a walk.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It's just about finding those things that help you recharge,
Yeah.
whether it's listening to music, spending time in nature, or connecting with friends.
And giving yourself permission to do those things without the guilt. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's essential for being able to show up as the best caregiver you can be.
I couldn't agree more. And that ties into the next takeaway. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Caregiving is not a solo mission. It takes a village. And there are people who want to support you. Family, friends, neighbors, professionals.
Yeah, we often put so much pressure on ourselves to do everything, but there's no shame in reaching out for support. In fact, it's a sign of strength and self-awareness.
Exactly. And that support can come in so many forms,
Mhm.
from practical assistance with tasks like grocery shopping or transportation to emotional support through listening and understanding.
Like Tina talked about, building a caregiving team and utilizing the resources that are available, and those resources can be found in some unexpected places.
Right. It could be a local senior center, a community organization, a religious institution, or even just a neighbor who's willing to lend a helping hand.
So to recap, we've got community humor, self-care, and asking for help. What else is essential for navigating this caregiving journey?
Well, as we touched on earlier, communication is absolutely key. This means communicating with your loved one, even if it's challenging about their needs, their feelings, and their preferences.
And also communicating with other caregivers, family members, medical professionals, just making sure that everyone is on the same page and working together effectively.
Exactly. And that communication needs to be open, honest, and respectful, even when it involves difficult conversations.
Speaking of difficult conversations, I think it's worth revisiting those tips that we talked about earlier, about approaching those conversations with sensitivity and a willingness to listen.
Definitely. It's important to remember that these conversations are a process, not a one-time event. And it's okay to take things slow, to revisit topics as needed, and to seek guidance from professionals or trusted individuals when necessary.
And also remembering that these conversations aren't just about, making decisions or solving problems. They're also about connecting with your loved one on a deeper level, honoring their wishes and ensuring that they feel heard and respected.
Absolutely. And sometimes those conversations can actually lead to some unexpected insights or breakthroughs. I've
Mhm.
seen situations where families were able to find common ground and move forward in a more positive direction simply by having those open and honest conversations about their concerns, their fears, their hopes.
Yeah, it's about approaching these conversations with compassion, with empathy, and with a willingness to see things from multiple perspectives.
Exactly. And it's okay to disagree, to express different viewpoints, as long as it's done respectfully and with the understanding that, everyone involved has the same goal to provide the best possible care for the loved one.
So, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from practical tips to emotional strategies to the importance of community humor and communication. But there's one final takeaway I'd like to highlight, and it's something that often gets overlooked: embracing the learning process.
Oh, absolutely. Caregiving is a journey of continuous learning. And there's no shame in admitting you don't have all the answers.
That's where resources like Too Late to Panic can be so valuable. They provide that framework for understanding the basics, but they also acknowledge that every situation is unique and there's always more to learn.
Exactly. And that learning can come from a variety of sources: books, articles, online forums, support groups, even just through trial and error.
It's about being open to new information, trying different approaches, and finding what works best for you and your loved one.
And giving yourself permission to make mistakes, to adjust your course as needed, and to celebrate those small victories along the way.
Because even those small victories, like getting through a difficult bath time or successfully navigating a doctor's appointment or just sharing a moment of laughter, those are the moments that make up the fabric of the caregiving journey.
They really are. And it's those moments, both the big and the small, that we need to cherish.
So, as we transition into the final part of our deep dive, I'd like to invite our listeners to reflect on what they've learned so far.
Yeah. What has resonated with you the most? What new insights have you gained, and what questions or challenges are you still grappling with?
Because even though this deep dive is coming to an end, your caregiving journey continues. And we want to equip you with the tools and the resources you need to navigate that journey with confidence, with compassion, and of course, with a healthy dose of humor. It's amazing what we learned about caregiving just from stuff you sent us.
It really
I
is.
mean, we talked
Yeah.
about everything from, like practical tips like getting prepared for emergencies and building a caregiving team to emotional strategies like finding the humor in all the craziness and taking care of yourself.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It really has.
What
Yeah.
strikes me is just how resilient caregivers are.
Mhm.
They deal with so much, so many challenges, juggling all these responsibilities and emotions, and somehow they just keep going.
It's really inspiring to see.
It
And
is.
it just shows you the power of, the human spirit
Absolutely.
to keep adapting and overcoming and even finding joy in the middle of all the tough stuff.
Yeah, and that's where those little bits of humor come in. Like those times when you share a laugh with someone or hear a story that makes you shake your head and smile. Those are the things that keep you going.
Totally. Those are like lifelines. They remind you that even when things are chaotic, there's still beauty and connection to be found.
Exactly.
So out of everything we talked about, what really stuck with you?
I think for me, it's just remembering that caregiving isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. What works for one person might not work for another. And it's okay to try different things, experiment, and find what feels right for you and the person you're caring for.
That's so important. There's no one right way to do this. It's all about finding your own way and what works best in your situation.
Exactly. And it's also about giving yourself permission to make mistakes, to learn as you go and to adjust as needed. There's no such thing as a perfect caregiver.
That's so true. It's like taking the pressure off yourself to do everything perfectly and just accepting that caregiving is messy and unpredictable and often really funny.
Exactly. And that brings up another point that really resonated with me. Self-compassion. Caregiving can be so demanding. And it's easy to beat yourself up when things don't go as planned or when you're feeling overwhelmed.
That is so true. We tend to put so much pressure on ourselves to be strong and have all the answers.
Yeah.
But we're all human.
We are. And that's where self-compassion comes in. It's about recognizing your limits, acknowledging your struggles, and being kind to yourself like you would be to someone you love.
I think that's such an important message, especially for caregivers who are so used to taking care of everyone else that they forget to take care of themselves.
Exactly.
And it's not selfish, it's essential.
It is.
It's essential to take care of yourself to be the best caregiver you can be.
I love that framing.
Me too.
It's not selfish, it's essential.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into caregiving, I want to leave you with one final question. What surprised you most about what we uncovered today? Did any of the stories or advice give you any new ideas for your own caregiving journey?
Caregiving is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to be a journey that's full of challenges and surprises. But it's also a journey that can change you in ways you never thought possible. Embrace those ups and downs. Find your support system. Find your sense of humor. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a whole community of caregivers out there who are ready to share their stories and support you along the way.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, remember, you're not alone. You're strong, you're capable, and you're loved. Embrace this journey, find the humor, and cherish those special moments, big and small. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.